Friends, in this video, we are going to study making of a global world. When we talk of globalization, we often refer to an economic system that has emerged since the last 50 years or so. But as you will see in this chapter, the making of the global world has a long history of trade, of migration, of people in search of work, the movement of capital, and much else. As we think about the dramatic and visible signs of global interconnectedness in our lives today, we need to understand the phases through which this world in which we live has emerged. So, this is what we are going to study in the first topic, pre modern world. All through history, human societies have become steadily more interlinked. From ancient times, travelers, traders, pilgrims, etc., travel vast distances for knowledge, opportunity, even to escape from persecution. They carried goods, silk, skills, inventions, germs, and diseases. As early as 3000 BC, an active coastal trade interlinked the Indus Valley civilization with present day West Asia. Number first point, Silk routes link the world. A good example of vibrant pre-modern trade and cultural links between distant parts of the world. Historians have identified several Silk routes overseas and on land. They existed since before the Christian era and thrived almost till the 15th century. Trade and cultural exchange went hand in hand. Chinese pottery, textiles, and spices from India traveled the same route. Christian missionaries and Muslim preachers traveled the same route to Asia. Buddhism emerged from eastern India and spread in several directions through intersecting points on the Silk Route. Food travels, spaghetti, and potato. Food is a good example of long distance cultural exchange. Traders and travelers introduce new crops to the land they travel. For example, spaghetti and noodles. Foods such as potatoes, groundnuts, tomatoes were introduced in Europe and Asia after America was discovered. Sometimes the new crops could make the difference between life and death. Conquest, diseases, and trade. For centuries before, the Indian Ocean had known a vibrant trade with goods, people, knowledge, etc. But the introduction of new sea routes to Asia adversely affected the trade through Indian Ocean. By the mid 16th century, Europe defeated America. The European conquest was not just a result of superior firepower. It was the germs, such as those of smallpox, that they carried on their person that killed America's original inhabitants. Americans had no immunity against this disease that came from Europe. Smallpox proved to be a deadly killer for them. Until the 19th century, poverty and hunger were common in Europe. Cities were crowded, deadly diseases were widely spread, and religious conflicts were common. And religious uh, followers were persecuted. So, thousands of Europeans migrated for America. The 19th century. Three types of movements or flows were identified by the economists within international economic exchanges. Flow of trade, trade in goods, example cloth or wheat. Flow of labor, migration of people in search of employment. The movement of capital, long term and short term investments. All three flows were closely interlinked and affected people's lives. A world economy takes shape. The 19th century Britain lacked self sufficiency in food. It was because of uncontrolled growth of population and expansion of urban centers and industries. Moreover, in the 19th century Britain, self sufficiency in food grain was considered of lower living standard. So, people of Britain used to import food grain from other countries. Government restricted the import of corn known as corn laws because of the pressure from landed groups. But the import when was stopped, obviously in the local market, prices of food grain were increased. So against this, the industrialists and urban dwellers opposed Corn Law. Finally, Corn Law was abolished, and its effects were: number one, food could be imported at cheaper rate. Second, vast areas of lands were left uncultivated because local farmers could not compete with the imported cheap rate food grain. Migration of people to the cities of overseas. Railways were therefore needed to link the agricultural regions to connect the ports. Capitals flowed from cities like London. Role of technology. By 1890, a global agricultural economy had taken shape. It was accompanied by complex changes in labor movement patterns, capital flows, ecologies, and technology. Food no longer came from a nearby village or town, but from thousands of miles up away. It was not grown by farmers for his family need, but it was grown for market, international market, and it was cultivated by agricultural labor. Colonization stimulated new investment in transport, faster railways, lighter wagons, and larger ships. Invention of refrigerated ships enabled the transport of perishable foods over longer distance. Before the invention of refrigerated ships and shipped live, and due to which they used to take lot of space. It used to increase cost of meat as well, and many animals used to die. Many of them used to become sick in the journey. That's the reason eating regular meat in the diet was the only possibility of rich people. But invention of refrigerated ships reduced shipping costs and lowered meat prices in Europe. The late 19th century colonialism. In many parts of the world, expansion of trade and a closer relationship with the world economy. It was a loss of freedom and livelihood for many societies. European conquest produced many painful economic, social, and ecological changes through which the colonized societies were brought into the world economy. Especially in 1885, the big European powers met in Berlin to complete the carving up of Africa between them. Rinderpest or the cattle plague. Rinderpest had a terrifying impact on people's livelihood and local economy. Africa had abundant land and relatively small population. Land and livestock sustained African livelihoods. Europeans were attracted to Africa due to minerals and vast resources of land. Employers used many methods to recruit and retain labor. As land was abundant and African people hardly need to work for a wage. And therefore, European colonizers adopted many methods in order to recruit and retain labor. Number one, heavy taxes were imposed, inheritance laws were changed, and mine workers were confined in compounds. They were not allowed to move freely in and out of the plantation area. Rinderpest, a devastating cattle disease, arrived in Africa in the late 1880s. It spread like a forest fire and killed 90% of cattle. The loss of cattle destroyed African livelihood. Indentured labor migration from India. Most Indian indentured workers came from the present-day regions of eastern Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, central India, and Tamil Nadu. Because cottage industries declined, land rents rose, lands were cleared for mines and plantation. That's the reason unemployment increased, and in search of job, workers migrated to different places. The main destination of these indentured workers were Caribbean island, Mauritius, Fiji, and Malaya. Recruitment was done by agents. They were appointed by colonial government. Agents provided false information about final destination, modes of travel, and the nature of work. Workers found living and working conditions different from what they had imagined. Workers discovered their own ways of surviving in Trinidad The annual Muharram procession was transformed into riotous carnival called Hosei. Similarly, protest religion of Rastafarianism is said to be reflect social and cultural links with Indian migrants to the Caribbean. Chutney music is another creative contemporary expression of post-indenture experience. Indian entrepreneurs abroad. Shikaripuri Shroffs and Nattukotti Chettiars were among us the many groups of bankers and traders who financed export agriculture in Central and Southeast Asia. They had developed indigenous forms of corporate organization. Hyderabadi Sindhi traders ventured beyond European colonies and established flourishing emporia at busy ports worldwide. Indian trade, colonialism, and the global system. During the 19th century, British manufacturers flooded the Indian market. Food grains and raw material exports from India to Britain and the rest of the world increased. The value of British export to India was much higher than the value of British imports from India. Britain used this trade surplus to balance its trade deficit with other countries. It also helped pay home charges that included interest payment on external debts and pensions of British officials in India. Third and fourth part we'll see in the next video. Thank you, student.